questions. So we will be conducting a short interview with you about your
Okay.
policies and motivations to run for city council, and it will be posted on our IGTV channel. And Youth for Joe Biden is a grassroots organization that focuses on mobilizing young voters to turn out and vote. And one of our initiatives is to interview politicians to show our members what a career or involvement in politics can look like. So today we'll be interviewing Michael Samson, who is a candidate for Walnut Creek City Council. So we just have 6 questions for you. Our first one is, what motivated you to run for Walnut Creek City Council?
Well, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. So I was motivated to run because, well, let's go back to what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis, right? So George Floyd was horrifically murdered at the hands of the Minneapolis police, and there was an uprising that happened there. And so me sitting at home, I saw this Minneapolis uprising and recognized that this is a real fight, and it's time to get in it if we want to be able to look back at this moment and not be ashamed of how we responded. So I chose to attend the June 1st protest in Walnut Creek. And I saw what happened there. I saw what the police did. I was on the freeway with my knees on the ground and hands in the air, and they still fired tear gas at us. And my mom was hit with a projectile. She was on the freeway too. And it was just a really horrific scene. And that was on the freeway. And then when I was walking home, I saw what they were doing in Civic Park too. And I was angry, and I was ashamed of our police, and then seeing how our city responded to it, I was even more ashamed. I thought, oh my gosh, this is our city council. Like, this is how they're responding to the issue of police violence in their own community. They really just kind of did nothing at all. And that really bothered me, especially because at all of these protests, we hear over and over again from speakers the importance of voting. So for example, the importance of voting for Joe Biden to get Donald Trump out of office. That's obviously incredibly important. But when you look at the local level, I didn't see anybody that represented our interests that was prepared to take any action against the police, and also just kind of fight for progressive causes in general. The Walnut Creek City Council is very conservative. So seeing how that city council intersected with the George Floyd uprisings and how they responded not only to that, but also to Miles Hall being killed by the Walnut Creek Police Department, which is to say they did nothing. All of these things, there was just so much in my head that I was like, this is so not right. And I felt that I could speak to these issues. And so I decided, I didn't see anybody else stepping up. So I decided to run.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. It's great that you're getting involved. I think it's really important, especially in local politics. So, I mean, that's really great. Our next question is, we saw that you're in support of the creation of temporary homeless shelters in your community. Can you tell us more about this and like what it would entail?
Oh, sure. Well, the Walnut Creek City Council did indeed just vote to convert the Walnut Creek Armory, which is run by the National Guard, to convert the Armory into a homeless shelter between the months of October and April. And my understanding is that they've been doing this for many years, to give homeless people a place to escape the bitter cold of winter. I am in support of this. I think it doesn't go far enough. I don't see why we can have a homeless shelter for half the year and not the other half. So I'm in favor of temporary homeless shelters. I'm even more in favor of permanent homeless shelters, and by approaching homelessness with a housing first policy, which has been proven to be successful in cities like Salt Lake and in Finland. So we've seen that a housing first policy is the most effective and compassionate way of helping those who are unhoused. So I'm in support of, if we can't turn the Armory into a year-round homeless shelter, then finding something to turn into a homeless shelter, and then even beyond that, by literally just putting our homeless community in housing and helping them to rehabilitate and get to a place where they can have a fulfilling, sustainable life, not just treating them as a blight, right? We want to deal with them compassionately.
Yeah, I live in San Francisco, so homelessness is definitely
Mm.
a big problem. So, I mean, it's great to hear that you're interested in that and helping with that. Our next question is, aside from the homeless shelter initiatives, what are some of the main issues you're running for or against?
So I alluded to it already, but I am in support of the defund the police movement. So Seattle, Berkeley, and recently Oakland have all pledged to commit to defunding their police by 50%. I think that every city in the Bay Area should take the same pledge and work to defund our police departments by 50% and to reinvest those funds into other networks of public safety, which generally are more efficient and get better results and are more cost effective. So with those savings, then we can reinvest those funds into any other community needs depending on the city. So I think my biggest single issue is going to be defund the police, that and justice for Miles Hall, which and these are connected because justice for Miles Hall, for those who don't know, Miles Hall was killed by the Walnut Creek Police Department. He had a schizoaffective disorder, and the Hall family, in terms of an emergency response for a schizoaffective mental health disorder, they didn't have any other options but to call the police. And so they did everything right. They developed a relationship with the police department. WCPD knew who Miles Hall was. And in their moment of need on June 2nd, 2019, when Miles Hall needed medical attention, all that they could get was the police. So they called the police, and the police ended up firing their guns at him as he was trying to run around them and go home. Um, he was shot in the side of his body 4 times, not the front of his body, the side of his body, just to, help any viewers who may still think that what the Walnut Creek police did was justified. I don't think it was justified. So justice for Miles Hall means implementing a new network of public safety so that families like Miles Hall's don't have to call the police when their kids are going through a mental health crisis. So implementing 24/7 mental health crisis non-police response, and to fund that from funds in the police, right? So when we talk about defund, what we're talking about is taking responsibilities and the associated funding for fulfilling those tasks away from the police and giving them to other departments that are better equipped to handle these issues and are unarmed. Um, and I would say that that would be at least in the realm of 50%. So defund and justice from Miles Hall.
Yeah, that's really great to hear as well. Our next question is, how do you plan to engage youth voters in this election?
Mm, great question. Well, that process has already started. So I've been protesting. It wasn't just on June 1st, but I've been protesting, um, ever since we learned about what happened to George Floyd. And I've been out in front of City Hall every day from 12 to 1. We have a daily protest in front of the Walnut Creek City Hall that goes from 12 to 1 in support of justice for Miles Hall. And so there are a lot of youths that are engaged in those protests. And so I've been engaging with them in that way. A lot of young people are actively, involved in our campaign, whether that means, researching on certain topics, whether it means speaking up at City Hall, whether that means making, memes for us. I'm excited to share all of the memes that we've been putting together. Basically, a lot of young people have been critical within our campaign already. And when it comes to the, engaging the youth, I don't want to sound like some stuffy politician that's trying to, like, what are the kids doing these days? Like, let's do that. Because I think people can see through that. So I think the best way for us to engage the youth is just to put out a strong progressive campaign and be ourselves. And I think and hope that young people will see the authenticity of that, and will resonate with our policy priorities. So we're not going to do any, like, gimmicks to get young people. We're just going to have a platform that speaks to their needs and wants. So, for example, young people are invested more than older people in the climate crisis, right? Because we're going to be the ones that live through the devastating impacts of it. And if we don't get our act together by 2030, then we're going to have an irreversible climate cataclysm. so an important issue for young people, I think, is committing to being carbon neutral by 2030 and supporting a Green New Deal. So that is one way, right? And that's not some, it's a gimmick. It's not a gimmick. It's a substantive policy agenda. So I want Walnut Creek to make the pledge to be carbon neutral by 2030 as well. So those are the main ways. Actually, it's not through any special tricks or anything, just by having a platform that resonates with young people.
Yeah, that's good. I think as Youth for Joe Biden, of course, we definitely think it's really important. The youth vote is really important this election. So it's great to hear that you're mobilizing youth as well. So our next question is, you mentioned that the Walnut Creek City Council right now is not very progressive, and of course you are a progressive candidate. How will you implement ideas from more moderate and conservative voters in your area and in the election?
How will I implement ideas from more moderate? So basically, how will I kind of work in collaboration with moderate and conservative voters? Okay. So I think, well, first of all, my hope is that because there's 5 members of the city council, and there are 3 seats that are up for re-election this year. So my hope is that we can have 3 progressives in those seats, which means that there's a lot less compromising we would have to do, right? So our goal, so we hope to get 3 progressives on that seat, on those seats, and then there's less compromising that would need to happen. But this has been an interesting topic that I've been talking about with a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So it basically goes along the lines of, and we hear this for other progressive candidates too, who are asking for, pie in the sky stuff, is that, these proposals are too X, they're too left, they're too radical, they're too expensive, they're too whatever, right? And you're being a purist about it. How are you going to compromise? I would say that first, I am, of course, open to compromise. But the difference is that, if you're coming if they're here, right, and then you're coming to the table here, then compromise is going to be somewhere in the middle, But if they're here and then you come in and say, ooh, we're going to need to compromise, let's start here, then the compromise ends up here, right? So if you have a stronger spot at the negotiating table, if you just advocate for what you want, which is going to be, further along than what I think a lot of moderate politicians tend to advocate for. And we've been seeing this for our whole lives, that, for example, the Democratic Party, I would say in general, tries to compromise before coming to the table, so that they can say that they're being open to all these different ideas. They're trying to get as many people in their tent as possible. I understand, but I think over time it weakens the party, and we have a weaker negotiating position, as opposed to just advocating for what you want, which is usually something strong, and then holding on to that, and then getting as much leverage as you can, usually through democratic support. So by galvanizing the public to get behind your progressive agenda, now you are at the negotiating table saying, I've advocated for 50% cut to the police, and I got elected on that promise, and they're still at my back, and here we are. So that's a stronger position than being vague and pre-compromising. We don't want to pre-compromise.
Yeah, so our next question, this is actually our last question. How will you motivate people who are hesitant about voting to vote in this presidential election and in the city election? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the world is kind of at stake in this one. I'm not sure if we have a country, if the United States keeps its soul, if we elect Trump again. And I'm very serious about this. I mean, I am not speaking in hyperbole. I really think that if we elect Trump, that it could be our last legitimate presidential election, at least until some other intervention. And it's a scary thought. So I'm not sure if a sense of, if you want to say save the country, I guess, or honestly, that's what I think is kind of the biggest thing is what happens if Trump wins. And I don't want to think about it, because, with someone like Joe Biden, if there is a huge wave of progressive activism, I think there is the possibility that he will budge and will and will, take at least some positive steps in a progressive direction. I think that possibility exists to a certain extent with Biden. I don't think it exists with Trump. He's shown over and over again that he does not care for democracy, and he doesn't really care what people think. He doesn't care what people say, and he doesn't care about how what he does impacts people's lives. So we could have a mass movement with 80% of the population involved, and Donald Trump wouldn't budge, and he's going to leverage whatever power he has. So I think just there's too much at stake. There's too much at stake, and even in anarchists like Noam Chomsky is saying, "Yo, y'all need to vote for Biden because there's too much at stake." So if even Chomsky is saying you got to vote for Biden, like we got to make it happen.
Yeah, that's great to hear that you're supporting Biden. That was the end of our questions